for coming this evening. We're very pleased tonight to be hosting this event, which stems from a new publication edited by artist Martin Beck, titled The Aspen Complex. The book itself relates to two iterations of an exhibition by Martin, which was titled Panel 2, Nothing Less Than a Touch of Ecology and Catastrophe to Unite the Social Classes, which took place at Gasworks in London in 2008 and at Columbia University's Arthur Ross Architecture Gallery in 2009. Tonight's presentation will draw on some of the key structural and textual points of reference in this exhibition through short talks and a screening. So I'll be handing over to Martin shortly to introduce the publication further, but we're also very happy to be joined tonight by Felicity D. Scott and Alice Twemlow, who both contribute essays to the book, and tonight we'll be presenting some aspects of their text. So before passing over to Martin, I'd just like to formally introduce tonight's speakers. Martin Beck is a New York-based artist who has exhibited internationally, both individually and in collaboration with Julie Holt. His exhibitions include the 29th Sao Paulo Biennial and the 4th Bucharest Biennial. The Details Are Not the Details at Orchard Gallery in 2007, and Installation at Succession in Vienna in 2006. He is also the author of publications including About the Relative Size of Things in the Universe from 2007, an exhibit viewed, played, populated from 2005, and Critical Condition with Julie Holt in 2003. Felicity D. Scott is Director of the Program in Critical, Curatorial and Conceptual Practices in Architecture at Columbia University. She is founding co-editor of the journal Grey Room and the author of Architecture or Techno-Utopia, Politics After Modernism from 2007 and Living Archive 7, Ant Farm from 2008. And Alice Twemlow is chair of the Design Criticism Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York. She is a contributor to Design Observer and writes about design in publications such as Print and the Architect's Newspaper. She is the author of What is Graphic Design For? In 2006 and has contributed essays to publications including Graphic Design Worlds from 2011. So again, thank you to them all for joining us tonight, and I'll pass it over to Martin.
Thank you, Richard. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So thank you all for coming out tonight, and we'll try to give you a good introduction to the book and the project that is behind the book is all about. Yeah. This is actually the fourth and probably the last of the series of book launches that organized around this book, and each one of them was sort of organized around a different aspect of what composes the book as a whole. Yeah, it started off an event with one of the contributors, Sally Buchmann, talking about the exhibition that is underlying the structure, followed by an event with two designers, Robert Solis and Rasmus Bamberg-Trolson in London, followed by an event with the curator of the exhibition commission, like the project originally, and now concludes here with the other two contributors to the book, with Felicity and Alice. And having Felicity and Alice here gives us the opportunity to actually sort of dive a little into the historical background of and the narratives that form the underlying structure of the book. Yeah. And I will just sort of introduce the book a little, not so much by telling you these narratives, because Felicity and Alice, I'm sure, can do that much better than I can, but with explaining the book structure a little. The book has basically three parts. It's divided into sort of the exhibition, which is documented through images and a substantial essay on the exhibition by Sally Buchmann. It has a part on the International Design Conference in Aspen in 1970, which includes a series of, on one hand, reprints from archival documents that have only marginally circulated in the past, or some of them have never circulated in the past, and extensive documentation visual documentation of the conference and the events there, and a really in-depth essay about the events of that conference, its sort of lead up to the conference, the conflict that emerged, came out at the conference, as well as its aftermath and its consequences. And a third part of the book focuses on a project where the town of Aspen was used as a staging ground, as a site to sort of model for a mapping project done by the Architecture Machine Group at MIT. And then part of the group, part of the book presents like documentation of that particular project, as well as a really substantial and insightful essay by Felicity. But what holds the whole project together is sort of the contemporary narrative of the exhibition. These two sort of events that use this particular town in Colorado as a site is like not only the term, but for me it was always like the tree of the aspen. Sort of the aspen as a tree that is very specific to not only this area in the Rocky Mountains where Aspen is situated, but it is specific in its the context, its ecological context. For once, that the town of Aspen is surrounded by these trees that are a subspecies of the aspen called the quaking aspen. A tree that sort of where the leaves they sort of quake or tremble with the slightest air movement, which is due to very thin and very flexible leaf stalks that they have. And this almost continuous movement is thought, and this little blurb that you see in front of you, that's instead of an introduction to the book, is thought to increase photosynthesis as it allows the sun to reach lower parts of the tree, thereby creating a translucent condition throughout the forest. So the tree basically regulates sort of a symbolic aspect of transparency, the possibility to see to the core. But aspen trees, they also propagate through root sprouts. They form extensive colonies that can spread over large areas. All trees in such colony share a root structure, making them part of a single organism. So it's a tree that has a fairly sort of metaphorical, symbolical structure to it. And those two sort of metaphors, transparency, looking to the core, as well as the connectedness, were something that really drove the project themselves. The two historical narratives that underlie the project, and I literally will not speak about the exhibition tonight because I mean it was like here in New York, quite a few of you have actually seen it. The narratives that underlie it. One is this conference that I mentioned that happened in Aspen in 1970 and has happened since the early 1950s as an exchange ground between designers, architects, sometimes artists, and industry leaders, in order to sort of exchange ideas and see how specifically modern design can be to the benefit of sort of the contemporary industry. In 1970, the 1970 iteration tried to sort of like take on a theme that was sort of building up and bubbling up throughout the late 1960s, which is sort of the emerging environmental movement. And as I'm sure Alice will sort of lay out in more detail, led to this fairly unique convergence of, on one hand, a sort of large contingent of the protagonists of modern design, including Elliot Noyes, George Nelson, Saul Bass, like beginning or groups of environmental activists, mostly from Berkeley, including like Ant Farm or Saint van der Riem, and a contingent of French sociologists, architects, and designers, among them Jean Baudrillard, and Lionel Shine or Jean Robert. And between these different contingents and a large group of students represented in one of these contingents, it quickly should sort of come out that it was sort of generated a situation where these people just could not speak to each other anymore. So it generated like a crisis of speaking formats, and that collapse of a literally a speaking format, is like on one hand what I was really interested in, sort of the panel as a format where you suddenly have to find a different way to articulate something, in addition to that really, I would say that exciting and fairly unique narrative. The second narrative, the development of this map, that you see sort of documented a little in the sort of video running on that monitor, was the first attempt to develop an image-based mapping system, to use actual sort of film footage and create an interactive environment where someone would be able to navigate on the basis of images, not just like your classic map, and move through a territory that one is not familiar with. That is something that by 1977, specifically after 1977, sort of the benefit of modeling a territory as a training ground has become sort of blatantly evident by the use of a one-to-one model of the Entebbe airport that the Israeli Defense Forces built in order to prepare for storming the hijacked Air France plane that was hijacked by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And Felicity sort of in her essay really speaks very eloquently about that. And what that Aspen movie map should become is literally the precursor to pretty much any sort of like down to like Google Maps, Google Street View, down to sort of military orientation devices that we all take for granted today. So we have like these two themes that run through the book. On one hand, speaking formats, presentational formats, the panel as a way of speaking to people, but also as a way to, as a literal sort of panel on the wall with information on it. And on the other hand, sort of the concept of how do you relate to reality through modeling. And that's what sort of the project literally sort of brings together. Then, like the book itself it's literally its own project. It comes out of the exhibitions. The exhibitions had some of that material in there. There was, in the two iterations, there was an handout brochure that republished for the first time some of the conference material. But then the book literally was intended to dive much further into these narratives, and also like bringing like people who had worked on one level concurrently, on one level sort of a long time before I got onto these narratives on these topics, and sort of the idea of the book was to commission like further research to go more into depth, to also use the book as a tool to sort of extend out from an exhibition. But what the book also attempted to do is to use sort of the visuality of the book as a speaking format as well. And For those of you who have sort of looked at the book, I'm sure you've noticed that the design of it was something that a lot of effort went into, and sort of the book itself was modeled after one of the very few, or the only, source ever in print, about the conference. Not so much that specific year 1970, but the larger conference as a whole, and is in itself like a very particular design icon, where designer Ivan Chermayev, from the big
corporate firm Chermayev from Geismar, sort of attempted to sort of bridge in the design this sort of like gap between ecology and industry that generated a big part of that conflict in 1970. So that was, to a certain degree, a guiding force in the design of the book. But on the other hand, it was also something that was coming out of the visual logic of the exhibition, and the designers sort of literally like diving into the details of the exhibition and isolating like visual operations that I had developed for it, and attempting to translate that into a visual environment. So you get a lot of book, with the Aspen Complex, and I think like looking at the book will sort of tell even more. And what we're going to do now, we'll switch over. What I'll show you, or that when we sort of literally start like digging into these histories tonight with, is a film that until showing it in these exhibitions has been laying dormant since 1971. It's a documentary that filmmakers Eli Noyes and Claudia Weil did in 1970 as a student project during the conference in Aspen. Eli Noyes was the son of Elliot Noyes, who was at the time the president of the board of the conference. And the film was sort of like literally the student project was used after the year after, a little to sort of advertise for the next iteration of the conference, but it hasn't been publicly shown ever since. And what I have, it's not a very good copy, but it's the only copy that exists. Even Eli Noyes, he doesn't have anything better, and he's sort of very excited to see that film circulate sort of again, and like one of the things that the show has done is literally to get that film out from the archives, and their like the help of Felicity was invaluable in sort of getting access to that film, and now it has a life of its own, which is sort of a nice result of an exhibition to come out of. So the film is about 20 minutes long. It has sort of very difficult sound levels, but I'm sure you'll get into it. It's also quite engaging in its visuality, and you'll see these figures if you sort of like have seen pictures of Saul Bass or Elliot Noyes before, or some of the Ant Farm crew. You'll see familiar faces in it, but you'll literally see sort of a clash of cultures, in this sort of fancy resort town of Aspen. And then after the film, Alice will sort of talk about her contribution a little more in depth and sort of explain sort of more about like what she was tracing in terms of the speaking format, followed by Felicity talking about more details about the mapping project. So, I'll switch over to the film and just let that run. So whoever needs to get a beer or is already a break, we'll get. So the sound starts very low and it builds up a little, so just bear with it.
I was asked on my arrival whether I had ever been to Aspen before. I openly admit that I had never heard of it before.
In a way, this is probably the wrongest place to hold this conference. Probably if we were going to discuss the woes of the environment, it ought to be held in Watts or in Harlem or in one of the worst slums or ghettos in this country.
Poor blacks, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, Indians, and the like will find it extremely difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to identify with any movement we start for environmental change, the major subject of discussion at this conference. You must begin to understand that these kinds of problems are white middle-class values and standards.
If you're not ready, if you're so fixed in your views, if you're not ready to entertain new ideas or concepts, some of them quite radical, you can't be an environmentalist. As long as production was increased, as long as this gave us more consumer goods, as long as our personal possessions and our comforts were increasing, everything was well. We were on the right track. The environment movement questions the wisdom of this.
Possibility of profit are ruining our life support system. Barry Commerce says that the 70s are probably a period of grace. I don't know. Myself, that's a question mark. But somehow I feel that the urgency, the calamity that's confronting us has not been transmitted to you. By the way, a lot of the talk about the environmental crisis bears a strange resemblance to religious notions about the apocalypse and the second coming. You're cleansing yourself, you're purging yourself of sin, and then you'll all emerge into the weekday again and start sinning all over again till next Sunday, or next Aspen.
I hope one of the things that we're going to learn at school is to be humble about the environmental thing. But we're already talking here as if it was us and nature. As if it was Jehovah recreating the world again. And if you think DDT is a permanent pollutant, how about architecture? Can we ever afford to have a piece of land the size of the Acropolis permanently polluted by the Parthenon?
Designers have become urban Elizabeth Ardens. We value stylish graphics, not communication. We anguish over more school facilities and ignore the unlimited classroom that is our city. See, the interesting thing is, with this logarithmic development of technology and the population and everything else that we're familiar with, you see, the interesting thing to me about this kind of analogy is it appears to me that, in fact, through all recorded history, we've had very few forms for communicating, for living together, for building. I don't know whether the existing institutions we have can be reformed anymore. The way in which I see reform taking place is through the creation of alternatives.
We have always learned about our society from the older people in it. For the first time, it's probably true that young people know more than older people do. They just know more. The young designers are saying, you don't know, but we've learned to live on very little money. We've developed a different way of going about our lifestyle. We mean it. I do believe they mean it. God help us, I hope they mean it.
Get out of the way if you don't understand. For the times, they are changing. Indeed, the times are changing.
It seems curious to me that design and change are so long in coming to a design conference. It's one person, one speaker, and 1,000 people glued to their seats, unable to move by regulation or boredom or otherwise or all of them.
This conference is a lot of sun-tanned people. That's your way to go.
It should be made so that it's not embarrassing to get up and leave around one's head.
And everyone should be able to creep right up on the speaker and take his picture from 2 feet away, like you're able to do, and like the official conference photographer there.
I keep flashing on the fact that the tenant materials from Sarasota, Florida, were Ringling Brothers, and I'm sure that's just circus stuff. And it's tempting, when you're sitting in there listening to a narcotic from the podium, to want to string a tightrope or bring in a dancing bear, or set up a 3-ring circus, or do something other than what we're doing.
I think the conference was designed to be whatever it becomes when the people get here. I don't think the conference was anything. How can you think that a design conference is anything to start with?
What do we do next to feel better? What do we do next to feel better? What do we do next to feel better?
Okay. Last night I got together, some of us were told we had this afternoon to do something, to generate something. So here's something we'd like to do. For this one, we're all going to stand up and take off your name cards. Don't be afraid. I'll say to start or something, and when I do, begin to pass the name cards around. Okay, change the cards. Okay, the next job is going to be to find ourselves.
Inside the
Does
tent.
anyone have any systems?
Find yourselves and take yourself to lunch tomorrow.
Anybody who likes their new identity can keep it. Mrs. Bennett wants to find herself. Norman C. Poole. Mrs. Bennett is very anxious to find herself. Somebody would like to have all the girls that would try and bring their heads together. Is there anyone who feels they can handle the situation? Meet yourself. Say hello to yourself.
Ask somebody for Craig Better.
Craig Better. Last night while we were rapping about this whole thing, one of the things that came to mind was that we're really making a very interconnected sort of ecological chain out of everyone. Not one of us could really function without all the rest.
I think the other thing is form. Here's Aspen, a design conference. This year we're talking about environment and ecology. On the debit side, there's a pretty large debit side of the design conference, 1,000 jet fares to Aspen and a lot of crap. Cliff Humphrey suggested we have lunch at the Aspen dump tomorrow and see what that looks like. There's a lot of energy here, a lot of energy. And this tent and the present form of the program represents one form to exchange energy, information, ideas.
The only conclusion is I don't think we should be afraid of randomness anymore, because I think we've discovered it's the only way we find our way to new solutions, and that we should try to find means of letting whatever occurs over the next 3 days occur, and not be confined by the program that's been set up. Okay.
Peter Pan.
It's like everybody wanted to go to Boston. See, we wanted to go to Boston to shut down the AIA conference. We didn't have any money to get there, so we sort of pushed buttons and pulled levers and threatened to have thousands of hippies coming out from Berkeley visit the Aspen Design Conference. We were going to put an ad in the underground newspaper in Berkeley advertising a free booth and hang out with the Aquarian Age architects and all that bullshit. And they bought it.
He shoots through there, and he just like anything, you know. He should then can't. We still love it. I mean, I've had as many drinks as I'd like to have in Aspen. And I left as much as I could ever drink in Aspen home in my own bar. So I didn't come out here to drink and party. The impression that might be made is whether or not we do have a common ground of really genuine one coming to grips to the problems that plague this country.
Is really the handicap to social change and lack of understanding.
But why is really time can tell this?
Doesn't it total it? I find that one of the traditionally utopian beliefs of the society that if only they would understand what I call the great fallacy of men of goodwill, which totally overlooks the concrete reality of vested interest, of institutional power. I mean, those things don't change because people understand.
I said that we are basically as Americans selfish and self-centered.
But you're also hoping that if people understood, they would be unselfish and not selfish.
No. I'm hoping that really, in this game of exchange, you reassess, and there is a reassessment of what you will lose if you continue to go the way we are going.
You want to say that I have to be able to understand what you were telling me today?
We were doing a
I don't understand what you tried to tell me today.
We were doing media hype, short for So we were saying that everything is a rip-off, everything is stealing from people.
Right.
Our generalization is based on the wrong premises. We are living in the wrong reality. Our civilization is based it's not real.
Tell me what the right civilization is right now.
Like, I can't talk to you then if you do that. See, because you were already saying that we're alienated.
No, I'm saying
Yes, you are.
I think you're saying you didn't communicate with me. And now I'm asking you in simple terms, what were you trying to communicate with me? This morning you were on stage 20 yards away from me. You're right here, we're one-to-one. We only meet here once a year. And these things are a big topic. And we think that it's a real youth, and we don't quite what youth, but an awful lot of people.
So we say, we want to stage a conference. We think the conference has values. We think we can learn something from this. Why do we have to assess capitalism? We're just trying to stage a conference.
You can't
Sure, it's all one, but what do you do in the meantime, then?
What do you do? Well, you work on building in a new way. Unless you start living the lifestyle and start doing it, then it's just bullshit.
Where does that ripping off Guatemala? Where does that ripping off Bolivia?
I mean, planting tomatoes is not inside the problem. What about
What about Talamonas that is paying green berets to shoot mines down in Bolivia? I mean, what about that? We're still ripping off these other countries.
So you're talking about a different thing here.
To me, that's what ecology is. The thing of ecology is not one person doing his thing. It's like looking at the way the institutions in this country are going to keep messing up.
It gets down to the point of nothing is real unless you do something about it. In other words, the reality I play with is reality I decided to change. Like, in other words, like if I was here in this conference and I decided to do something valuable, that's what we're saying. I go and I change my life.
I would like to give you a few things you could do positively without being pointed at as a radical, without looking queer, without looking strange, without having to grow hair, without having to use a picket sign, a brick, or anything else.
If our youth can say hell no to the draft, I think a few of you have to learn how to say hell no to some salesmen and some developers. I mean that sincerely. Tell them no.
We're really wondering whether or not you're on the case. We had accomplished what we came here to accomplish when we arrived. We have arrived. This conference is never going to be the same. Never again. Let's get some more people at this conference next year.
acted according to the meaning of the speech, it would be enough.
They applaud black speakers because they are black.
Everybody is going to be where everybody's at. What I would like to say is the young people could have come here, or anybody could have come here, the blacks, we could have just shut this damn conference down just like that. No sweat. You get some very mild resolutions like this, and everybody's ready to freak out and walk out. We should bring up these resolutions, and if you don't believe in them, have the guts to stand up and say so. Let the designers at the Aspen Design Conference 1970 stop the furthering of unnecessary consumption of resources by refusing to create structures whose sole purpose is the creation of profit and therefore a destructive force in our society. At the contrary, at the Aspen Design Conference 1970 urged the President of the United States to withdraw immediately from Southeast Asia. That the health, education, and welfare provide free medical care and adequate housing and guarantee a balanced diet to all who live in the United States. That the United States should legalize abortion.
All those in favor of making it a petition, please stand.
If every individual signed that petition right now in this room, it will have absolutely no effect on anybody. First of all, you have such a great faith on the meaning of a signature. Do you know how many people can sign that signature and act as if they never signed it?
All those resolutions at the end had nothing to do with the subject of the conference. This was about politicizing, I believe is the word, at the Aspen Design Conference. And I am not a political guy. I'm not interested in becoming a political guy. I'm interested in making my points through my work. You know, Mike Doyle said it on the stage. He said, boy, plenty of people out there just about ready to break this place up unless you listen to us guys, you know. And if you don't vote on this thing, boy, I can promise you trouble. You know, I just don't play games with this kind of thing. I can't. It's not in me.
I think the board of directors are going to have to ask themselves whether or not they want the design conference for a group of professionals and talking about relatively specific matters, or another direction.
It would be much better to say, to ask ourselves if our most enlightened selfish interests are in any way consistent with the interests of the students.
I don't think this is a student point of view. I think it's a very responsible type of position they were trying to take. Each one of these guys really, in some way, tried to responsibly, to the best of his knowledge, get things going, get information flowing, and they weren't here to disrupt. Inasmuch as that's true, that there's no such thing as division between students and everybody else. It's all one thing. They just have one point of view which is common to them, and that is that there is not enough information that gets passed around here, and that until there is, the conference isn't worth much.
But is the design conference a place where we have to start action?
Yes, I would think so, because I would think that around this room there is perhaps as much professionalism, as perhaps good ideas, and people who are sincerely interested in a good direction, as anywhere else in the world. I mean, you don't get a group like this anywhere.
My impression is that we've come to the end of the line of this conference. A new kind of conference, which is this wave we saw approaching, is coming along. I don't think we can convert to it. I don't think we should try to. So I'm saying that we've had 20 years. We are now obsolete. And we hope that the young or somebody will find a way of doing their kind of conference, because I don't think we can do it for them.
If I walk away from this, I will feel defeated as a person. It's almost, it's as though we've got to really learn whether we can change and whether we can look at our problem with this conference in a completely new way and solve the problem. And the problem this time is life. You know, it isn't the design problem, it's ourselves. Really, I feel this, that's why I'm so shook up about this whole thing.
All right. All those in favor of continuing the conference, raise their right hand.
Opposed?
And I think we did it.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Martin, for creating, and Sternberg Press for creating this fantastic book. I just think it's a model for how all academic books should be from now on forever. It's just really beautifully done and it's very inspiring. It's fun to be up here as well. It's quite an honour actually to be here with Felicity Scott, fellow essayist. Very exciting to be. And thanks to Artist Space for having me with us. So I just want to make a couple of points before I sort of go into summarising my essay. I'm a design historian, and my subject of study is the history of design criticism. So my PhD research examines the dynamics of design criticism in the US and the UK since the 1950s. I'm especially interested in that relationship between design criticism and its topics. So I'm approaching this subject matter, the Aspen Conference, and particularly the 1970 conference, which was the occasion for the critique, as Martin's explained. So I'm approaching this subject matter as a type of criticism, a critical format, just as much a material artifact of criticism as a column or a blog post. The protest that punctured the conference was made up of resolutions, which we heard, corridor discussions, Q&A sessions, clothing, and the lack of it, body language and gestures, parties, theatrical performances, games, happenings, picnics, and name-badge swapping, inflatable structures and graphic ephemera, and all of these I considered vehicles of criticism in that context. I also want to note that I'm an inherently minded design historian. My method and process centres on locating and really kind of stitching together fragments of evidence in order to recreate a narrative. In this case, a narrative account of what happened over the course of those 5 feisty June days in 1970. I've used photographs, board meeting minutes, conference publications, tape recordings, presentations and discussions, reviews of the conference at Design Press, invitations, and of course fabulous film we've just seen, letters, interviews, and found some of these documents in the Getty Research Center in Los Angeles, some in an archive in the basement of one of the Aspen houses, and some in the Hunter Middleton archive at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And I really just want to commend this book again and other examples of Martin's work, which collect these sources, these fragments, and celebrate them for their kind of primary sourciness in a way that design history books don't usually do. Because as a design historian, I think you're really motivated by the thrill of tracking down these scraps of paper, these yellow whispers from the past. And then they end up being written into history, but out of existence in their own right as artifacts. They become tiny footnotes, adding intellectual ballast to the dense essay. And I love the fact that in this book and others of Martin's, the sources are the star of the show. They've stepped out of the footnotes and are available for everyone to use in a really kind of accessible way. Okay, so with that said, I'll briefly summarise the essay, but without giving the plot twists away so that you can buy the book. So Martin wanted me to examine the ideological conflict, the breakdown of communication that was at the root of the protest at the 1970 conference. A breakdown of communication between, on the one hand, the American liberal design establishment who organised the conference, with their close-cropped hair, plaid jackets, 5 o'clock gimlets, and pearl-bedecked wives, and its men like Herbert Bayer, the Austrian emigre consultant to obtain the Corporation of America. He moved to America in 1946 and lived in Aspen and built a lot of buildings there. Very dapper, as you can see in his cravat. Still pretty handsome at 70. Saul Bass, a Los Angeles motion graphics designer. Elliot Noyes, design director at IBM and president of the Aspen Design Conference since 1965. And George Nelson, the design director of the high-end office firm of Herman Linen. And then on the other side of the ideological divide, you've got these guys who look a little different, as you can see, but their waist-length hair, beards, open neck shirt, bandanas, jean jackets. They both look and think very differently from the geezers we just met. So, while to the Aspen board members, the real kind of founding fathers of modernist American industrial design was a problem-solving activity in the service of industry. They were pretty clear about that. But But this group of dissenters moving in had a very different conception of design. In their view, design was not really about things like good taste or upholding professional values. It had much larger social and specifically environmental repercussions, and they really thought that designers needed to claim responsibility for that. Another way in which they regarded design differently, I think, was that they didn't necessarily consider it purely in material terms. It was something to do with interconnected systems and processes, and very much related at that time to this notions of exploitation of natural resources and what they referred to as unchecked population growth, which is a big theme. So to briefly introduce some of these characters on the dissenting side, we've got the San Francisco Media Collective, known as the AFAR. And by 1970, they're pretty well known for their nomadic lifestyle, their use of inflatable structures as a setting for their free-form architectural performances, and a lot of kind of experimental multi-year image making. Biff Humphrey, founder of Ecology Action, and that was actually the originator of the first drop-off recycling centre in the US. And his Berkeley hobby had just been featured in the New York Times cover story before he appeared at the conference. Chip Chappell, a teacher from California, Michael Doyle, who we saw reading out resolutions, the founder of the Environmental Workshop in San Francisco. The Moving Company, an improv theatrical troupe. Sim van der Rijn, assistant professor of architecture at the University of California, Berkeley, and founder of the Farrellands Institute, which is an organization concerned with kind of connecting ecology to design. And the other group in this mix, somewhat bizarrely actually, is a group of special guests from France, known at the conference as the French group, which, as Martin said, included the philosopher and sociologist Jean Baudrillard. Rather bizarrely, as you can see, and the architect Jean Aubert. And in all these accounts, we notice he wasn't sort of part of that movie, and in all of the accounts of the conference, very little is made of it. I mean, my main impression is no one actually knew he was there, quite honestly, which is sort of bizarre looking back on it, but he was, or at least members of the group. He wrote a sort of a piece that was read aloud in the final session, which was really, really good read. So Baudrillard and Aubert at the time were members of a group called Utopie, which was a Paris-based collective of thinkers and architects, which were engaged in a pretty radical leftist critique of architecture and the urban environment. And so, as you can tell just from that list, each of these dissenting groups is coming from a really different place, geographically and ideologically. But in combination, if you could draw some kind of common thread between their critiques, they're protesting the conference's really flimsy grasp of pressing environmental issues and its outmoded, non-participatory format. So very, very, very quick history. The conference was conceived in 1951, high-altitude meeting for designers and businessmen in which share interests in culture and commerce. This is the promotional material for the first conference. Design as a function of management. It was founded by Walter Pepe, president of the Chicago-based packaging company, Container Corporation of America. And he was really committed to humanist beliefs, and I think they very much diffused, certainly the early years of the conference, perhaps almost up to 1971, the year we're talking about. And here you can see him with a younger Herb Bayer. Papke was really keen that attendees coming to the conference would be kind of renewed in body and sort of body and spirit as well as mind. So there were all these kind of outdoor activities, lots of long lunches and rambles in the surrounding mountains, fishing, jeep expeditions. This seems rather typical of this program. And as the conference evolved, it broadened. The idea of getting businessmen up the mountain with the designers didn't work too well. I think it lasted for about 2 years before the businessmen found they had other things to do with their summers. The designers were still very keen, and they evolved the conference and started inviting participants from all the other professions and disciplines. So you had scientific philosophers, biologists, poets, and composers, all kind of flown in to inspire the designers. But the point is that while the scope of the conference was expanding and the theme was changing, the format remained the same. Speakers addressed the conferees from a raised stage in a big tented auditorium. And there was very little opportunity for improvisation because the way they did it was they would circulate speaker presentations among the audience ahead of time. But by 1970, the one-way transmission of information from a designated expert on this raised stage to a passive seated audience was clearly untenable. This was, a period of massive media revolution after all. Students and activists had occupied other design conferences of the period as part of the growing critique against corporate modernism. Most famously when they closed down the Milan Triennale in 1968, but one of the guys from the Amp there was referencing that they could have gone to Boston and closed down the AIA conference. That was actually happening concurrently with this. Also, at campuses across the nation, new teaching structures were being tested out. In some cases, entire schools were being invented in the form of free universities or anti-universities. That was very popular, I think, at the time. And the California Institute of Arts was established in the fall of 1970 as what they called a radically different prototype for training the artist of the future. Despite being funded by Walt Disney. So here we are in 1970. You've got an emerging counterculture clashing with the government over Vietnam, the draft, the civil rights movement. And in design, you've got the model of radical architecture and design collectives emerging, things like Zoo Studio and UFO. So Elliot Noyes asked Sim Van Rijn to bring some guests to the conference. And the previous year, the students attending the conference had made the sculpture of jumped cars, toilets, sinks, old tile, and sprayed them all white. As a comment on the current state of contemporary design. A critique, yes, and an eyesore, certainly, but basically containable within the conference and understood or sort of recognised as a sculpture by the organisers. But what Van Jones' gang of environmental activist groups wanted to do, they weren't so interested in making sculptures. They wanted to spend their money, the Graham Foundation funding they'd received, to bring all their people from their organisations in buses, in chartered buses, to Aspen, giving theatrical performances along the way. And then once they were there, they wanted to set up inflatable structures to hold meetings and exhibitions and to do performances, and in general to create a series of events that they always thought to be, quote, to be in conflict with the conference itself as an almost counter-conference or an anti-conference. So yeah, you get to begin to see this idea of this conflict rising. But basically, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that there was a scientist called Samuel Hayakawa who in 1956 had written an essay called How to Attend a Conference, and it kept getting republished year after year at the conference and circles. And it was all about sort of how to resolve arguments, how to build consensus, how to be a civil conference attendee. And he said, he wrote, discussion is stalemated by conflicting definitions of key terms. And of course, the 1970 conference was filled with conflicting definitions of key terms. I mentioned how different the young environmentalists and the aging bodies looked from one another, and that they had different beliefs. But I think having watched that really heated conversation between Bass and Noyes and members of the moving company, you really get to see the extent to which even their basic vocabulary differed. I mean, in the beginning, one of them had to explain to Noyes what hype meant, right? And define hype. And later, the conversation breaks down completely around the term alienation, which, clearly entered sort of Californian lexicon by this time. And then, I don't know if you caught it, but at the end, Bass asked the students, why do you have to assess capitalism? We're just trying to stage a design conference. And I think the very fact we could ask that question in the middle of that group really points to that incredible disconnect that's going on right at that time, particularly. So tensions mount during the week until they reach this kind of crescendo of closing session at the end of the week. The French group presented that paper that I mentioned, written by Baudrillard, and he was really kind of dismissing the conference theme of environment by design, as well as the widespread interest in environmental issues, as a sort of utopian opiate concocted by the capitalist system to unify a disintegrating society, and really to kind of divert attention away from the real pollution, which was a social and political pollution of society. The students took to the stage, they wrote their resolutions, they read them aloud, they asked everyone to vote on them. It's things like restoration of land to the Native American Indians, stop the persecution of the long hairs, this kind of thing. And the final resolution asked the designers attending the conference to refuse to create structures, advertisements, products, and develop ideas whose primary purpose is to sell materials for the sole purpose of creating profit. That one must have stung. It really kind of struck to the core of the design profession as it was represented at the Aspen Design Conference and pointed to the contradiction in this particular theme being discussed and indeed sponsored. I mean, this is Italian sponsorship dollars for the conference. By those deeply implicated through their day-to-day activities in harming the environment. So next morning I saw the board all gathered to try and figure out what the hell had just happened. And I think that side discussion between Elliot and Bass is, you know, it's kind of sad in a way. I mean, Noyes is really trying to get to grips with this palpable change in the conference atmosphere and the unfamiliar demands of its new population. He can't solve this design problem. And as we saw, he resigned his post of his presidency that he held for 5 years. But interestingly, the Noise and Wilds film wasn't embargoed by the Aspen Design Conference, as you might have imagined. It was in fact used to promote the next year's conference. Several prints were made, and they were loaned out to corporations, Alcoa, Westinghouse, Electric, Whirlpool, and arranged screenings for their design department, much like ours this evening. The new president, Jack Roberts, thought he could sort of give it a new twist by adding a little 2-minute epilogue at the end as an advertisement for the next conference, and he concluded the briskly jovial line, "We'll turn over a new leaf in Aspen." So, using the film, the primary document of the conference's protest as a commercial, the next one is certainly an interesting response to criticism, and probably might have been regarded by students as a textbook example of capitalist system's ability to assimilate its own inherent contradictions. In his essay, Playing Policeman, which I recommend to you, Baudrillard suggests that the only way to counterattack a system that assimilates its own problems and turns its own crisis to advantage, that is blindly in denial, is to, quote, interrupt it by insisting on the almost blind need for a real pleasure principle, the radical demand for transgression. And that's exactly what Richard Farson, Dean of Design at Cal tried to do the following year. He picked up on that kind of leftist thrust of the students' resolutions and the French group statement. He wanted to address these kind of really major social and political issues at the moment, sexual politics, the impact of drugs such as LSD. This is the list of the books that kind of the underpinnings of the conference, the intellectual underpinnings of the conference, ranging from feminist manifestos through to expositions on psychology. There were still some keynote speakers: Buckminster Fuller, Victor Papanek, born female author Carol Bird. But really, the whole mood and nature of the conference had changed that following year. Much less discussion of design, much fewer formal presentations, and then what they had instead were these roving sessions or experiences, as Farson called them. There were video workshops, a balloon ascent, design games, the screening of films, and this happened in the Aspen Highland Ski Lift by the artist Alan Capra. So again, it began to take on the qualities of a kind of carnival. On the first day, for example, a Stanford psychologist led a consciousness expansion session in which participants explored their transpersonal psychic states through such techniques as psychosynthesis. And the co-editor of the Marijuana Review discussed the production of a new free consciousness, which must have been fun. And Farson, who was actually, as well as being the Dean of Design at Cal Arts, he was also a psychologist and chairman of the Western Behavioral Sciences Unit, which was really keen on developing sort of group workshop formats as a means of communication. So he really tried to re-critique this conference from the ground up. Ultimately, he considered it a failure, And it was conspicuously excluded from Rainer Adams' History of the Conference, that book that Martin showed us with the leaves on the front. In 1974, when the Aspen Papers was published, Bannon felt despondent enough about the future of the conference to observe that, quote, an epoch had ended. And yet, despite the intensity of the protests in 1970 and experimentation with communicative formats in 1971, the Aspen Conference didn't implode, it didn't irreversibly redirect its course, it kind of just absorbed the critiques leveled against it, appropriated some of those new formats, and ultimately kind of returned to a lecture-based structure with a bias towards celebrity designers. And, you know, 40 years on, some of the same issues are still debated within the profession, especially those that relate to participation, non-hierarchical formats, and political relevance of subject matter. I think that whenever we approach a design conference, we always feel that the format needs to be redesigned. That's the first thing we do. So really, the Aspen leaf is still turning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, and without much interruption, we go to see how sort of Aspen was also the staging ground of the breakdown and communication of developing a new relation to Julia Aspen.
I'm actually much I learned to begin by thanking Martin for the invitation to be part of this program. On being a fan of the book, and Martin asked me just to very briefly speak to introduce some issues and histories addressed in my essay. The title of that essay is Darkland, Dataland, and its Ghosts, and it's subtitled Aspen Proving Grounds, precisely for the reason Martin mentioned that Aspen itself becomes a testing site for what are ultimately new military technologies. And so what I'm going to speak to is my degree, which is the demo from the artificial machine group that is playing over there on the monitor. And so there are two intersecting histories at play in my essay. One, that of the architecture machine group Aspen Movie Map, that I'm introducing here, and the other is again that of the International Design Conference at Aspen. And in some senses, what I tried to do was to stage a meeting between these two, particularly around their shared concerns with developing new techniques of sort of perceptual management and environmental control. And in both cases, both the history of the design conference and, as you'll see the movie map, experimental film played a large role, but experimental film as articulated with the behavioral and social sciences in some of the most pernicious ways, we might say. So the Aspen movie map is the primary subject of my research. I wanted to note that ArcMap imagined, architecture machine group ArcMap imagined right from the start of the research that IDCA and Aspen Complex would be one of the whole of the fitting context to present technology. And so for me, this sort of imagining back into the context of Aspen again speaks to the larger managerial ambition of the Aspen Design Conference, and ultimately, I think also reflects in very systematic ways on some transformations that were going on in architecture, certainly as the architecture machine group imagined its future roles. So, just a little bit, very briefly, history of ArcMap. They were founded at MIT in 1968 by Nicholas Negroponte. They're perhaps better known, or the groups perhaps better known, in the art context for its contribution to the software show in 1970 here in New York at the Jewish Museum, where they presented a project called Seek, and famously a computer-controlled environment that serves a habitat for a colony of gerbils who whose interaction was monitored back through a computer program. And in effect, they served to train that machine. It was a sort of paradigm of artificial intelligence in which the gerbils sort of played into their own subjugation to the electronic environment. Around 1980, ArcMap also was transformed into the Media Lab, well known to many of you, I'm sure. So, ArcMap, though, initially in the late 1960s, conceived of the computer, so most of their research was at this intersection of architecture and computer. But they initially saw the computer as a tool, as an interface between the architect and their work, effectively a tool during, you could say, a representation of collecting information, of solving problems. By the late 1970s, when this project came about, their focus shifted to forms of data collection, to various strategies in management, both again of data and of the environment, and to developing a system of, in this case, environmental simulations that would operate, as you see again, control mechanisms. It's quite literally no longer conceived of these technological experiments as having anything to do with design of buildings, but they became, as I mentioned earlier, technologies of perceptual regulation and management, and technologies that fed into environmental control. So in the wake, just to sort of other contexts, in the wake of the so-called urban crisis here in the United States in the late 1960s, and also very much pointed by the war in Vietnam, by various insurgent groups in Latin America and the Middle East. Many of the architecture machine group projects, and yes, the movie map falls very precisely into this category, serve to demonstrate, and particularly to military funding bodies, to demonstrate how architectural expertise might be brought to bear in these sort of large, sort of interdisciplinary think tanks. So quite literally demonstrated the way in which architecture become part of big science, become one more facet of the military-industrial complex. So these are quite literally developed a type of counterinsurgency technology. So to turn to the project in 1978, the group received significant funding, and you see the opening session of the demo site space. They received very significant funding from the Cybernetics Technology Division of DARPA, was a division of the U.S. Department of Defense, to develop this movie map. The result, as you see, is a computer-controlled, it's actually an optical analog system that was run through a new technology called video disc that stored this data as individual frames, and it would simulate movement through this so-called virtual environment by drawing upon this multimedia database. And also what you can see here at the bottom, for instance, is the various touch interface mechanisms that allow you to seem to be choosing your route through this system. So they called this virtual or surrogate travel. And users were able, and I quote here, they were able to learn about an unfamiliar urban space by traveling around at will through sequences of photographic footage or helicoptering above dynamic aerial photos and reference maps. And there are moments in this video as well where they switch to that mechanism. So its goal, as another researcher recalled, was to create so immersive and realistic a first visit that newcomers would literally feel at home or as though they had been there before. The system, very briefly, it includes a series of different interfaces, we could say, or what they imagine to be channels. There's travel land travel, and then there's both a film component that was produced by driving around the town of Aspen and shooting single frames using a Bolex XL stop frame camera that had a trimming mechanism that would shoot frames every 10 feet. It was mounted to the top of the van. The other system soon was a quick and dirty animation system, or QuadS, and it attempted to map or register exactly the same set of images that were in the filmic component, but they were produced through a very early wireframe computer modeling system, and then they were accessed in the same way from the video disc. There are two additional systems. The Mapland I mentioned basically was a database of aerial photographs and maps that you could also maneuver through. And finally, they call it data, and you see various moments of this where they switch between summer and winter, or they enter a building in effect again. Data, again, is often proper to the sort of behavioral sciences. It was a way of learning about the subjects inhabiting this environment before you went in to deal with them. So, and so as I point out in the essay, yes, the movie map validly, and I mentioned this, drew lessons from the Israeli Defense Forces response to the 1976 hijacking of an Air France jet a flight originating in Tel Aviv that was hijacked to Entebbe in Uganda. And the idea, as Martin mentioned, had built a sort of physical mock-up, quite literally a replica of the airport that had been designed by an Israeli architect to practice their rescue operation. And with the movie map, quite literally the idea of reconstruction of a physical airline terminal, the terminal where the hostages were held, is replaced by a sort of virtual model produced, of course, through electronic media. And this appealed to the Department of Defense on the assumption that computers would be able to achieve this type of environmental simulation much faster, much cheaper, allowing the military advanced knowledge to hostile territories. So quite literally the idea is that soldiers would be able to familiarize themselves with this environment before they entered enemy territory. This was actually, they did develop some sort of real prototypes for events in Iran and other places, but it was never really put into practice. Yeah, just a couple of other points to conclude. The movie map famously established a very paradigm of interactivity, and the whole rhetoric here is of choice, of participation, quite literally even of a type of agency that would be achieved through this device within these data spaces. It indeed, the prehistory of also, I don't really see so much of it here, but the spatial data management system, the prehistory of this interface of the spatial sort of concepts and even the icons initially developed by the architecture machine group at MIT during the same period, and similar contracts from the Office of Naval Research and other military agencies. And so just to say that the project then stands not only as a landmark in the history of architects' involvement with computers, but quite literally as a precursor to contemporary paradigms of spatial managed data and interactivity. Again, as is the case in the late 1970s and 80s, paradigms that are all too frequently celebrated as actually enhancing individual agency or choice. So I just wanted to read one paragraph from my text that speaks to some of the limitations here. So Mack's attempts to achieve verisimilitude, and this was like crucial, the idea that you actually simulate some of that experience. Their attempts to achieve verisimilitude of travel and the appearance of a fully dynamic system within the movie map, the sense that one could drive anywhere within the town, determining one's speed, route, and view, remain troubled by a series of limitations that they sought repeatedly to overcome. Limitations were apparent, for instance, with the initial use of a joystick as an input device, which implied far more degrees of freedom than the system actually allowed. In the virtual Aspen, one had to, as you see, drive down the center of the street at a position elevated approximately 11 feet higher than the passenger would be in the vehicle. You had to move at discrete 10-feet intervals. You had to look either directly in front or to either side. Moreover, uncanny visual anomalies and events emerged within this virtual time. On account of the discreteness of movement and the inconsistent speed of filming, as one of the researchers wrote, there was a disconcerting separation of temporal and spatial linearity, later adding that space and time do not obey familiar rules. The environment is unevolving, and scenes are repeated. It's interactive, but it's not live. So that is, certain events and scenes endlessly recur without changing, even if the sequence of their periods alters. The same dog appears at the same corner, the same person enters the same building, the same car crosses the same street, and so on, mattering little whether the object was animal or machine. So here then is a form of repetition without difference. a form of iteration without drift, or whatever we call different modes, and attempts to prove the system of these peculiar remainders of the material world captured while showing the film, which appeared to me, and they repeatedly talk about their uncanny, sort of ghost-like nature, proved impossible. And they returned over and over, except, of course, in the animated Aspen, the quarter system, with its more carefully registered but equally spectral traces of building facades. And they talk about the ways in which you could actually fix up and render appropriate the image of the town. And then, just to say briefly, I then switched from this reading of Aspen as a site for the architecture machine group to the conference that digitally traced the way in which this conjunction again of the film, which is largely experimental film from the intersection of Whitney and Sam Vanderbeek, questions of management of the social sciences, and large-scale funding coming out of corporations and other aspects of the military-industrial complex repeatedly came together in the films of Vanderbeek and Whitney, who produced many of those works with corporate funding and even corporate residencies. So once again, I sort of use that then to trace these commonalities in questions of environmental control and this perceptual training, and also sort of articulate the way in which the Aspen conferences, totally in terms of what Matt was doing, these are techniques that are seeking a sort of increasingly global realm of operations at this moment in the late 1970s. Okay, that's all I was going to say.
Bertie. Thank you, Felicity. Thank you, Alice. I think that we've gone on like a long time already, and I would say if there's any lingering questions, we can sort of answer those over here at the book table. Yeah. So the book is out there. It's just become available in the US, and it's the first chance to actually get it. Yeah. So thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. Yes, please do. Going by and copy the book site, join us for a beer.
Yeah, but as an undergraduate in a bridge course, so I think it's 2 1 hour rather than 2 hours. And I really was not, like, I really was used to 2 hours. They already did this study. So, these are like some part of those lectures. Basically, you got to redo the whole thing. So, I changed it, and I'm changing the whole material. So I did a Peter Berger session on the first Thursday. Then I went to Buenos Aires for a conference. Oh yeah, John Cage conference. So actually, we've been joining this. So sort of like we organized that they're 2 hour long ones, and I said why I want to introduce. So they did a Cage documentary on the Tuesday, and then did a Beast Garden performance, some Meet Joy, some, I got the library at Columbia to buy a whole bunch of collections. Meet Joy, some performance, Stan Van Eyck film with Russell performance. Oh, it's the same. It's the first bit. So they showed those, which was good. It was a good overview for the undergraduates of some of the stuff that they used. Then I did a session on Cage, which I was in Buenos Aires with musicologists for the whole week. So it was like I had musical examples. I was like my whole musicologist for and then I did a whole session on Thursday, basically based on the essay. Basically, I developed that. I developed that when I was preparing for class. I had this sort of epiphany that once I was in and that I would have been a new song.